Napoleon's invasion of Russia is widely acknowledged to be a disaster. It led Napoleon from being Emperor of the French and undisputed master of Europe, to sovereign of a small Mediterranean island, dependent on pocket money from the newly restored French monarchy. Why then did Napoleon invade in the first place? What motivated him to take such drastic action, especially when we consider the alliance between France and Russia, and the personal friendship that Napoleon had with Tsar Alexander? I'm the Enlightened Edelweiss, and in this video, we'll be tackling the question of why Napoleon invaded Russia. To begin with, in order to properly understand the reasons for Napoleon's invasion, we must first take a look at what was known as the Continental System. The Continental System was a blockade initiated by France against Britain that forbade all trade with them. By 1810, at the height of Napoleon's power, the vast majority of Europe was integrated into this system. However, Russia, which had been an ally of France and thereby a part of the Continental System since the treaties of Tilsit, was greatly suffering as a result of its lack of trade with Britain. The treasury was running deficits of 126 million rubles in 1808, 157 million in 1809, and 77 million in 1810. National debt had increased 13 times, and the value of the ruble plummeted. The volume of Russia's Baltic exports decreased by a third between 1806 and 1808. It's for this reason that they began to secretly trade with Britain. When Napoleon caught wind of this in November of 1810, he was livid, and sent a warning to the Tsar, stating that any further trade with Britain would make war inevitable. Tsar Alexander retaliated by issuing a decree stating that trade would once again be open to neutral countries such as the USA, and certain French luxury goods would be banned, while others, such as wine, would be placed under heavy import duties. It also stated that certain types of cloth manufactured in France and the Confederation of the Rhine would be burned. This was a clear violation of the treaties of Tilsit and the Congress of Erfurt. And while it didn't open up trade with Britain on paper, the reality was that opening up trade with neutral countries made it exponentially easier for British smugglers to bypass the Continental blockade and trade with Russia. When Napoleon heard of the decree, he remarked, "I would sooner receive a blow to the cheek than see the produce of the industry and labor of my subjects burnt." However, Tsar Alexander wasn't the only party violating the agreements made at Tilsit. Napoleon himself, in his efforts to enforce the Continental blockade, annexed the small Duchy of Oldenburg, which openly traded with Britain even after repeated warnings from Napoleon. This is important not only because the independence of the duchy was guaranteed by the treaties of Tilsit, but the regent of the duchy, Duke Peter, was the father-in-law of Tsar Alexander's sister. Naturally, news of Napoleon's annexation deeply angered the Tsar, and he felt even more insulted when, in compensation, Napoleon gave Duke Peter a territory 6 times smaller than the duchy. By now, relations between France and Russia had considerably soured since the friendly displays of Tilsit. However, even before the annexation of Oldenburg, Tsar Alexander was already considering a war with France. From October of 1810 onward, various advisors to the Tsar were all sending detailed plans, centering around numerous possible situations in the event of such a war. In early December of 1810, Alexander's war minister, Barclay de Tolly, planned a defensive battle on both sides of the Pripyat marshes that would take place after a preemptive strike resulting in the destruction of Napoleon's bases in Poland. The annexation of the duchy put these tensions on a boil. This situation was further stoked by an economic crisis that hit Europe in 1811. Napoleon, a firm believer in his protectionist policies, decided to clamp down even harder on his enforcement of the Continental System, and went on to increase pressure on Russia to comply with it. While Russia didn't make up a substantial portion of Britain's trade, Napoleon feared that if it was allowed to leave, then other countries would soon follow. He believed that Britain was on the very edge of defeat, and that the strains of the economic crisis, coupled with the Continental blockade, the maintenance of its empire, the war, and the defense of its shores, was not financially sustainable. He wasn't completely wrong. Britain certainly was under immense financial stress, especially when war broke out with America in 1812. However, even so, it was just about managing to stay afloat and keep on top of all of its expenses. It was ironically Napoleon's invasion of Russia that relieved some of this financial tension. Another key point of contention between France and Russia was the issue of Poland. Through the treaties of Tilsit, Napoleon created the Duchy of Warsaw, carved out of the Polish territories of Prussia. Many saw this as the first step towards the restoration of the Kingdom of Poland. This was particularly threatening to Russia, as such a restoration would likely result in a massive loss of territory and manpower, as much of the kingdom's former lands now lay in the Russian Empire. Additionally, the creation of the Duchy of Warsaw meant the introduction of the Code Napoleon, along with all its guarantees of social equality, right on Russia's front door. This posed a threat to the nearby Russian social hierarchy, and led to the Russian nobility fearing a break from the status quo and the possible emancipation of their serfs. It must be noted that Tsar Alexander wasn't necessarily against the restoration of Poland in general, however, only if it was under his control, and not under France's or as an independent state. In December of 1810, he even covertly inquired into the willingness of Polish nobles to accept such a restoration under his authority. Meanwhile, Napoleon, eager to avoid any misunderstandings, offered to sign a joint convention with Russia that would dispel any notion of his restoring the Kingdom of Poland. Tsar Alexander, however, wanted more. He demanded the words Poland and Poles not be used in official correspondence, that the wearing of Polish decorations be banned, and that Polish emblems not be used within the Duchy of Warsaw. In addition, he demanded that if there was a Polish uprising to restore the kingdom, Napoleon would crush it with military force. To this, Napoleon refused, and tensions continued to simmer over the issue, causing mutual distrust. Throughout this period, Napoleon's spies were sending back information about Russian plans for war. This caused Napoleon to fear for a surprise attack and certainly played into his later decision to strike first. In September of 1810, Russia initiated massive military reform and built a number of fortifications on its western borders. There was also a massing of troops on the border with Poland. Napoleon saw this as a confrontation, and it reinforced his notion that Russia was planning for war against France. At this point, both sides began to mass troops around the border. It is clear that Napoleon didn't actively want war with Russia, but at the same time, he wasn't completely averse to the idea either. He felt that Russia was compromising France's position in Europe, and was completely convinced that Russia was planning a surprise attack on France. In an attempt to relieve the situation, he wrote to Tsar Alexander in February of 1812, attempting to dissuade him from war through diplomacy. He gave the task of delivering the letter to Chernyshev, who was the Russian ambassador to France, and also, unbeknownst to Napoleon, a Russian spy master in France. Chernyshev took a full 39 days to return with the Tsar's response, and by then, it was too late. Prince Poniatowski had found out about Alexander's inquiries into the restoration of Poland under his control through the Polish nobles, and the French, anticipating a Russian attack between mid-March and early May, were making preparations accordingly. With the reluctant support of Austria and Prussia, along with a whole host of other foreign contingents, Napoleon had roughly 615,000 men with which to invade Russia. He was confident that if he struck first, he could achieve a quick and decisive victory, just as he'd done not infrequently in his earlier campaigns, with battles such as Austerlitz and Friedland. Overall, it was his unwillingness to compromise on the Continental System, his fear of a Russian attack due to various points of contention relating to Oldenburg, the Continental System, and Poland, and his confidence in a quick and easy victory that ultimately led to Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia. Well folks, that's the end of the video. I hope you found it useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.